It's the biggest video site in the world. It's the biggest music service in the world. It's the biggest podcasting platform in the world. It's probably the most popular, most consumed entertainment platform in the history of the world. YouTube is just like such a multi-purpose utility that I think people do tend to forget just how big and important it is.
So what's the direction of travel then? And I guess asking this kind of from a point of view of Hollywood and the film industry, because what we're seeing now is people who became famous on YouTube, Mr. Beast, Coco Melon, now getting their own shows. Is that the direction that we're going to see this going, where increasingly YouTube becomes the incubator for shows that then go onto streaming platforms?
You know, Hollywood studios and TV networks have tried to make programming with social media talent, especially YouTube stars, for at least a decade now, right? You know, we had a couple. Lily Singh was a big YouTuber who got a late night talk show. It didn't quite work. Grace Helbig was a big YouTuber who got a talk show. There were some movies that cast talent. We're seeing a second or third attempt at it. I think part of it is that these stars have gotten so big that there's now a greater confidence that they can deliver. And part of it is that Hollywood companies have learned that they can't force some of this talent into their formats. They have to sort of empower them to continue doing what they're doing. So the Mr. Beast show for Amazon is just like a maximal version of what he does on his YouTube channel. And I think, you know, Coco Melon, they're basically licensing YouTube videos and then paying them to make slightly longer and more expensive versions of it. We'll continue to see more of that.
That's interesting. So there is a difference in what it takes to be successful and get traction, get audiences on YouTube compared to what it takes to be successful on traditional television, but even in streaming platforms.
Yeah, I think so. I think what people want on YouTube is different from what they want from Netflix, at least for now. People come to like a creator for doing a specific thing, right? So when there was a point in time at which this Swedish gaming creator PewDiePie was the biggest YouTube star in the world, right? And YouTube funded an original program with him as part of this original programming initiative that they had. And it didn't resonate in the same way that his channel did, because it wasn't what people came to watch, right? Like, people liked watching him speak off the cuff while playing games. There was an intimacy to that, but there was also a rawness, and it felt sort of less sanitized and manicured. And so then seeing him being the star of a more traditional TV show, even though it was already on YouTube, I just don't think appealed to those people in the same way.
And you just come back from a trip around Asia. Is there no global competitor or even American competitor who looks like it's going to knock it off its perch of such huge dominance?
You know, there was definitely a moment where TikTok appeared to be that, and YouTube was intimidated because a lot of emerging and independent creators were posting to TikTok first. I think they saw, you know, one of YouTube's great strengths historically was that it lowered the barrier to entry for anyone who wanted to, you know, make video. And that barrier felt higher to some because YouTube had gotten so big and there were some established players. So going from 0 to 100 got much harder. And they saw creators going to TikTok instead. TikTok is still a big competitor, but there just isn't anything that operates in as many different categories, right? Spotify is competing with YouTube in music and in podcasting and in some video. Netflix obviously competes with YouTube globally. I'd say is one of the biggest competitors in terms of entertainment. But they just play different roles because YouTube is free. So like YouTube has hundreds of millions of users in India. Netflix has about 15 million. It's just much easier for YouTube to penetrate some of these poorer markets. Now, there's not as much money there, but from a just reach as many people as possible, there really isn't a direct comparison. Maybe Instagram.
I had a conversation recently with Jonathan Haidt, and we were talking about kids and screen time. And it occurred to me that as we were talking, that so many of the social media companies have been kind of put under the gun, right? TikTok, Instagram, some of them being hauled up before Congress to justify what they're doing. And YouTube seems to have escaped some of that scrutiny. how's it done that, and do you think it'll carry on doing that?
I think it comes back to this idea that people don't know how to categorize YouTube. It is it is in some ways a social network, right? And I think some people initially saw it that way because it came from Silicon Valley, because there were comments, because people were uploading their own videos. But it is also as much and I'd say more so, an entertainment platform, but also at its core, because it's part of Google, it's a search engine, right? Like that's in a lot of ways how Google views it. It's a video search engine. And so I think the difficulty of categorizing it has just made it people aren't quite sure how to attach it or approach it. Its biggest scandals and dramas were around brand safety, which was this issue with sort of advertising appearing next to unsavory
Hmm.
videos. And that was a real crisis for the company for several years that I think they have largely kind of overcome. But you're right that they haven't received the same scrutiny from a regulatory perspective, certainly as Meta or TikTok. And it is a little bit baffling. I just speaking from an American perspective, like to me, it is so funny that the government would not allow one company to own two domestic broadcast networks, but it's fine that Meta owns both Facebook and Instagram, both of which reach way more people than any broadcast network. And it's fine that Google or Alphabet owns both Google and YouTube, again, both of which reach way more people than any domestic broadcast network. So I think part of it is also just like our regulatory behavior is pretty antiquated.
What are the big changes that you see coming to the platform in the next year or two?
I'd say in aggregate, the big change is that as more and more advertising dollars flow to YouTube, creators and channels will have more money to invest in their programming. And so there's a pretty widely held belief that, you know, you'll continue to see the caliber and cost of some of the top YouTube shows go up and resemble more television. So if it sort of started with pretty low cost unscripted programming, you may see some more expensive unscripted shows. Mr. Beast being one example, right? The average cost of one of his videos is $3 or $4 million, which is comparable to what you'd see on television, but not comparable to almost anything else you'd see on YouTube. And related to that, one big area that I'm actually in the middle of writing a story about is the growth of scripted programming. Um, it's still pretty small on YouTube. It's never taken hold in a real way. Part of it is that scripted is more complicated and more expensive, and YouTube channels couldn't afford it. I think part of it is also just that the YouTube as a platform is sort of more hospitable to unscripted programming. But as it becomes possible to make more and more money on YouTube, and as it becomes clearer, I think, to top writers and actors that there's just a much bigger audience on YouTube than some of these other places, I think you'll see more and more people try scripted. And you'll eventually, much as sort of Netflix has replicated pretty much anything you could find on television, with the exception of sports, which is starting to change, YouTube has replicated almost anything you could find on television, with a couple of exceptions, and that will start to change.
This is a kind of meta question, not meta as in the company, but meta question. Is YouTube the straw that broke the camel's back of monoculture? I mean, I grew up in an era, you didn't, of where there was still just a few channels on television, everybody watched the same thing. We progressed away from that, but now it seems that really it's broken, and I wondered whether people will start hankering for that again, for a common experience in this very fragmented, polarized, divided world that we live in. Is there any sense of a pushback where people are saying, actually, we wish we were all watching the same thing and talking about the same thing, that we had this cultural experience that unified us?
I did experience life pre-ubiquitous internet and pre-monoculture. But I did,
Okay.
but by that point, there was cable. It was not three broadcast networks.
Right.
Um, I don't know the answer to that. Like, I think we like the idea of there being a monoculture, right? It's fun when you have a moment like, Barbie comes out and it seems like everyone is talking about this movie, or the Taylor Swift tour happens and everyone is talking about this tour. And obviously we enjoy, we are social creatures, and so we enjoy these moments where everyone is bonded by the same idea, or interested in the same topic. But it certainly doesn't feel like we're on the precipice of returning to that in any way, right? If you think about how Netflix and YouTube work, which are the two kind of dominant entertainment platforms right now, certainly the two fastest growing, they are tailored to your individual tastes. People do not watch shows and videos at the same time. There are things that go viral, but that virality is fairly short-lived. Um, and so, I guess like adolescence in some ways feels like a monoculture moment, right? Everyone, frankly, I haven't watched it yet, but everyone is watching and talking about this show. But unlike in the past, when that might last for the 10 or 20 or 30 weeks that it's on, it lasts for a week or two, and then we're on to the next one. Um, I- I don't know that I would describe it as progress, but that pattern feels like it will only continue and accelerate. I don't see us reverting to some world in which we are all watching the same thing, unless there's a fundamental shift in sort of the distribution mechanism.
Yeah, it's been described to me as a moment where we're living in a me culture with short attention spans.
Yeah, because it's all about like YouTube, Instagram, Netflix. Everything feels like they are serving you specifically as opposed to serving all of us collectively.
Lucas Shaw, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.